ATI-Mirage, and I'm going to take you through a session entitled Custom Fields in Microsoft Project. So in the session, we're going to be looking at what custom fields are, how you can use them. We'll look at a practical example of setting them up in a Microsoft Project file, and we'll also look at some of the limitations, things you have to watch out for when you're using custom fields. So, what are custom fields? Well, for people who use Microsoft Project, you know that when you open Project, it comes up with a list of fields or columns that you can use, and these are all preset. But Project comes with a number of additional columns that you can use to add in further information. So that's what they are. Additional columns that can be added to your project tables to include extra information relating to the project, or to provide productivity tools to aid in the analysis of project data. So there's a variety of different types of fields that you can add in. They can include custom text and number fields for adding in additional information about your projects. Also, particular tools for being able to do things like limit the number of options people can pick from a list of text, to perform calculations where you might want to add, subtract, multiply, or divide columns by each other, and also options for adding totals to the top of specific columns that you add into your system. There is also a feature called graphical indicators, which is a bit like, I guess, working with conditional formatting in Excel, where you can ask Project to display particular icons on the screen based upon values that you put into the system. So here's a full list of the different types of custom fields. I'm not going to go into them all here. There's a couple of interesting ones. There's one called flag, and the flag field is one particularly that allows people to pick from just two choices, yes or no. The text field that gets used for creating drop-down lists or additional text columns. And also there is a number field as well for putting numerical values into the information you're working with. On the right-hand side, you can see there's a list of how many, so you can add quite a few additional columns based upon these different categories. Okay, so within our particular project, there's a number of different formats you can apply to these custom fields. You can create drop-down lists used to create a list of values. You can set a default. You can restrict what people can whether people can add to that list or whether they can just pick from the choices that are there. Calculated fields, very much like in Excel, where you can do calculations and also use functions like if functions in there. The difference is between that and Excel, they're based upon the whole column rather than on individual cells. You can also apply totals to numerical columns that you add in, and they have a variety of tools, some average, maximum, min, that you can apply to those columns. And graphical indicators, as I said before, similar to conditional formatting in Excel, they use fields rather than cell references, and they can include a greater variety of symbols to use than you normally get within Excel. All quite interesting, really. So how do you go about setting up custom fields? Well, you access the custom fields dialog box, select what type of custom field you want, whether it's text, number, flag, cost, etc., etc. Set the format, whether you want to set it up to use something like a lookup feature or a formula or a graphical indicator, and then once you've set it up, insert it into your table. So let's have a look. If I go down and have a look at a project file I created earlier, you'll see this is a project file that has some standard columns in here, such as task name and start and finish, but it also has some additional columns that I've added in. One's for section, which if I hover over the top of it, you'll see it says it's section brackets text 1. So it's using a text field, but it's being called section. I also have a one called contract required, which is a flag field that basically gives people two choices that they can pick from in this list. And when they pick these choices, if they choose yes, it automatically will put in a tick. If they don't choose yes, if they pick no, then it leaves the field blank. The next three columns are numerical fields. I've created one called price, where people can put in a cost, quantity, where they can put in a number, and total, where they're going to carry out a calculation where they multiply the price by the quality to get a total figure, and a total at the top to get the combined total of those figures that are in there. So these are examples of some custom fields we can set. If you want to create a custom field, I'm going to create a custom field now. Say I want to create one to indicate whether the task in here is a high-risk task. So we're going to create a column called risk that gives people three choices, high, medium, and low. And then we're going to put in a graphical indicator to indicate if it's a high or a low value that's in there. So the process you go through, Well, if we go up to the Gantt chart tools and we click on Format, then under Format there's a choice for Custom Fields, and that's where we go. So when you go to Custom Fields, you'll see there is a list of different types of custom fields that you can choose from here. You can also specify whether they're task-based fields or resource-based fields. As you can see here, I want to create a text field that people can pick from a list of text options. So from this drop-down, I'm going to choose text. So I'm going to choose one of these ones here. I'll choose, say, text 2 to use for this particular one that's here. So I've clicked on text 2. Down the bottom, I can ask it to rename this field. So I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call this one risk. So any of these fields you can give a name to. So I'll call this one risk. So that's the first step, giving the name to the field, text 2. Then you'll see we have these custom attributes. I can use a lookup to pick from a list of choices. I could apply a formula to these values. I could ask it to do a calculation on the list that's in here. I could also ask it to set a graphical indicator for this data. So for this example, we're going to create a lookup list, and then we're going to create a graphical indicator for it. So in the lookup list, if we click on lookup, we can ask it to list a series of values. I'm going to put in 3 values here: high, medium, and low. And you can make this list as big as you like. You could also add a description on the side to describe what those items are, which would appear in the drop-down when you set it up. Down the bottom, you'll see there's a few choices. I could ask it to use a value as the default, and I'm going to set medium as the default value here. So by default, whenever people put in a record in here, it'll default to medium. Okay. I can ask it to do other things like display the order of information, and in data entry options, I could specify whether people could add their own items into this list or not. I'm not going to in this case. I just want them to pick from those 3 choices. So if we click on close out of here, then it will have added 3 in, and it says, look, just be careful in case there's anything already in there. But I'm feeling pretty confident about this, so I'll say OK. So we've created a lookup list of choices that's in here. I also want to set a graphical indicator for these choices. So if I go down to graphical indicators, you'll see the graphical indicators allow you to set a test, which is a condition you're going to use, what value it responds to, and an icon to be displayed in the box. So I'm going to say the test is going to be equals, and the value in here is going to be, well, one of the words in the choice, let's say high. Now if high appears in the list, then I want to put in a specific symbol. And just because I can, I'm going to go down and put in a green, oh no, better make it a red unhappy face. Likewise, I could say if the risk equals low, then we can ask it to put in another symbol. I might go for a green face, say. So I've set them for high and low. I haven't set anything for medium. You don't need to set it for all the values. If you don't set it for a particular value, we'll just leave it blank. So we'll click on OK, and that's what I've done. Created a field called risk, asked it to set it up with a lookup to look up a series of values, and to provide a graphical indicator depending on which value we choose. So if I choose OK, I've now created that custom field. It's not displayed in the list here, but if I go across to where we say add new column, and if I typed in R for risk, R and I, you'll see that risk will come up, brackets text 2. If I click on there, it's going to create this particular column as a drop-down list. And if I click on the drop-down, if I chose high for this box, then when I click off it, if I choose medium, it's not going to show anything. If I choose low, then it's going to show low in those particular conditions in the box. Okay, so the graphical indicators will come up depending upon the choices that you put into the boxes. So this one's going to be high, this one's going to be low, this one's medium, no response associated with those. Okay. Didn't come up on the top one, of course, because that's a summary task. So that's an example of adding in a custom field. If I look at any of the others here, for instance, if I go to the one called total, if I right-click on that, I can go down and view my custom field, and it will select that one. I can see down here this one's got a formula in here. When I click on the formula, it says it's going to say the cost field multiplied by the number field. That's how it's done that calculation. and down in the calculation area here, I've asked it to sum the results. Hence, that's why for this column, it does that calculation for the tasks, and it's summed it in the summary task up the top. Okay, so that's an example of working with a custom field. As you can see, very powerful, useful features if you want to add additional information into your project files. Okay, so let's go back to my presentation. So we've had a bit of a play with that sort of thing. Now, there are some limitations to working with these fields. One is, you may have noticed that the title and the name of the field may not be the same. For instance, if I go back to project in here, you'll see that we have a column called task name, which is a standard column. But you'll see in there, when I hover over the name, it says task name brackets name. The field is called name, but its title is task name. So what appears up the top isn't necessarily what the name of the field is, just to confuse you. So a few other things. When you go to the formulas and functions, certainly while you can do formulas and functions in here, obviously there's not as large a range as working with Excel. So for instance, there isn't a lookup function that you can use in here. You can use an if function, you can use some standard things like sum and average and the like, but you won't find some of the more fancier functions that are in Excel. Also, they apply to a whole field. I can't, as you could in Excel, ask it to apply a calculation to just one row of data. It applies to the whole row of information that's there. And importantly, if you copy a table with custom fields in it from one project to another, you have to remember to copy the fields as well. In project, it's possible when you go to the File menu to use something called the Organizer. Now, the Organizer is a tool that allows you to copy information from one table to another, project file to another. You just need to remember that if you've created custom fields, as I have in this file, they don't exist in other files. So I'd have to make sure I copied these across to be able to use them in another file as well. Okay, so that's a bit of a summary, I guess, of working with custom fields. They're very powerful features. Hopefully you've enjoyed that and you can find some use for those things. My name's Bill. I hope you've enjoyed this session, and I wish you all the best of luck in your work with Microsoft Project. Okay, now what I'm going to do is get out of this session.